your first time, to introduce myself, I'm Mark Stoddard. I run sales and marketing here at ClientSuccess. We have Dave Blake, CEO of ClientSuccess. And of course, we have our guest of honor, David Jackson from the Customer Co. as our guest today. Dave, however we want to say it. Davey, all of them. How you guys doing?
Not bad. I'll go by Dave and for this time.
All right, we'll go with Dave and David. Awesome, very good. Can everybody hear us? Just a quick chat in the chat pane just to make sure that all of our audio and all of our videos working. Looks like everyone says we're all good. Says we sound crisp. I'm excited for that. You don't get that when you're doing an American session. Nobody says it sounds crisp. I'm excited. So very good. So just a few kind of housekeeping things. As everyone that maybe this is your first time, we've been doing this as a series. We've got probably about 14 of these sessions that we've done since the middle of March. We've been doing them pretty much every Tuesday, Thursday. So if you want to go back and view any of the others, there've been some incredible content from customer success thought leaders, practitioners, consultants, all into the spectrum. If you want to go back and view any of the previous sessions, there's a ton of really good content there. Go to clientsuccess.com/webinars. You'll see all the recordings there. After we wrap with Dave today, we're going to go ahead and we're going to post this session there. And so it's a ton of really good content while everyone's, thinking about how to level up their customer success game. And so that's there. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave. I think Dave Blake wants to share a couple things, and then we'll get on with it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you again. I'm Dave Blake, the founder and CEO of ClientSuccess. First of all, tell me where you're coming from. I'd love to see in the chat, where is everybody coming from? We're excited to have you here.
Dublin,
thanks.
We got folks from Alabama, Portland,
Canterbury,
Kansas City. We got Brazil. We've got folks waking up early. This is a big deal.
We got my friend James Phillips from Utah, Redwood City. Excited to have you all here. Thanks for taking time. I know there's a lot going on right now. I know you're taking care of your customers, and we're just grateful that you would carve out an hour with us today. For those who are out there, there's a couple of key things. And if you're a longtime listener, you've heard this many times, but for those who are new, I want to share one quick thing. We have a lot of friends and colleagues in the space who have been impacted. Some of you on the call today probably may be in that situation. We're putting a call to action to everybody for our hashtag Help One Hire One. And that is all about trying to get our friends and colleagues back to work as quickly as possible. So if you can help somebody look at a resume, make an introduction, help them find opportunities, please do so. And if you're in a position to hire, please do so. We'd really like to everybody to join in. This is a very strong community, and we're so grateful for everybody who's got behind this movement and this hashtag. So please help where you can. The second thing I want to do, if you don't mind, I'm going to brag a little bit. We're excited yesterday that we found out that we were awarded the 2020 CODI Award for the Best Customer Success Solution. For those who don't know who ClientSuccess is or what we do, we're not just a webinar company. We are a software company. We build solutions for customer success teams and to help drive this culture of customer success throughout your company. So we're very excited. Big shout out to our team who come to work every day with a passion to contribute to this community. We're excited about our customers and grateful for them that push us. And if you haven't seen ClientSuccess, we'd love to give you a demo someday. So thanks for joining us. Last thing, we're here for anything. If we can help from a thought leadership, from a content, from a solution. If you just want to talk shop, let us know. We'd love to help out as you build and grow your customer success company or strategy. And before I jump off, Mark, I want to say thank you to David Jackson. I am thrilled to have David here. David is a longtime founder and CEO and thought leader in this space, in the customer experience space, and just SaaS in general. He brings this seasoned experience. He will challenge your perspective to look at things differently. And he's so generous with his time and a good friend. David, thanks for joining us. I look forward to being in London with you again someday when all this is over. hopefully sooner than later. But thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody for coming today.
Yeah,
We
thanks,
definitely
Dave.
do a beer sometime, Dave.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, David.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and one final kind of call to action for Dave. If you want to get in touch with us at all, best places to get in touch with us, you either come to our website, ClientSuccess.com. And if you want to see our solution, see what we've been up to, see some of the recent innovations we've made around NPS or around revenue management or some of our new integrations, you can just find us on ClientSuccess.com. Or if you want to start a conversation, we're on Twitter at ClientSuccess. Both good places to get in touch with us, or just, say what's up in the chat pane. You've got our undivided attention for the next hour or so while we chat through things with Mr. Jackson. So that being said, let's switch gears, and we're going to jump into today's session. So this is going to be a little bit different than some of our previous sessions. If you've seen the previous sessions, we've had a mix. Some of them have been a presentation where somebody comes with a topic and they're going to present and give a bunch of thought leadership and a bunch of ideas around on it. Some of it's going to be very kind of tactical, go do this advice. If you were on our session last week with Mike Redboard, on how to manage renewal ops, he shared that interesting spreadsheet of how to manage the actual renewal ops of a business. Very tactical, kind of the what to do. Today's going to be a little bit different. I think we're going to focus a little bit more on the why of a lot of what we do in customer success. And I think in order to really be a well-rounded customer success professional, you got to have both. And so I'm excited for it. We're going to keep this as a very interactive session. And so I'm actually going to turn off the slides. We're going to just open it up to videos. David's going to present on some things, but as you have thoughts, questions, challenging ideas, pop them in the chat pane or pop them in the Q&A. I'll be manning those. And anything else you want me to share before we jump into things, Mr. Jackson?
No, we're good.
All right. In that case, I'm going to stop the share and let's jump into it. And so like I said, if you have questions, maybe I think, David, you're going to present for a little bit and kind of share some ideas and some thoughts, but let's make this interactive. If you have other questions that you want to pop in, feel free to pop them in the chat pane and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks, Dave, for the intros. It's quite interesting. This is called a thought leadership piece because I know a little bit about a few things, but one thing I don't know a massive about is what I'm going to talk about, strangely enough. I am an amateur psychologist, but I'm going to talk about psychology. Let me set the scene a little bit and tell you about a couple of things. One is a bit about my background, and the second is why the whole subject of psychology and how it relates to customer success is so much of interest to me. I am as old as I look. In fact, I'm probably older. I've been around a long time.
I'll take
it. Yeah, I've been in logistics. I've been in academia. I've been in consulting. And in 2000, I started a SaaS business. I was founder and CEO of a company called ClickTools before SaaS was a phrase. Bootstrapped it and grew it. And we did a few successful things. We were the first European software partner for Salesforce in 2004. Great move. That got us a lot of business. I appointed my first CSM in 2005. And that was because Salesforce did it. And they were about the only people around that we could learn about how to run a SaaS business.
Were you calling them were you calling them a CSM, or what did you call them at the time?
Well, we did call them a CSM because...
Did you? Okay. You were ahead of the curve.
Well, no, we were behind the curve in some respects because Salesforce were the people that were ahead of the curve.
Gotcha.
So if anybody knows the story, there was an Irishman who very early in Salesforce life, they were at a leadership offsite, and they were talking about all this wonderful growth that they'd got. And this guy from Ireland stood up and said, actually, we've got a big problem because we're adding all of these customers all the time, but our churn is running at 8% a month. And that, I think, was a huge shock to Mark Benioff and the rest of the team. So they said, we're going to do something about it. And Benioff being Benioff, they did it. So they created this thing called Customer for Life Group. Now, we were a partner of Salesforce. We were a customer of Salesforce. We used Salesforce. We were also a supplier to them. So we knew them quite well. And in fact, the people using our application, which was a survey, forms, and feedback app, were people that went on to form Customers for Life. So we had an early insight into what they were doing. So we just copied them.
Gotcha. That's fascinating.
Yeah. It grew. We did okay. And then I managed to sell it twice. So in 2010, I sold 49.9% to SurveyMonkey. And then 4 years later, 2014, did effectively like an agreed deal and sold 100% to a company called Calidus Cloud, which is now part of SAP. And since then, I've gone back to doing part of what I enjoy, which is mainly coaching and consulting, only with B2B SaaS companies. They're the only people I work with. One exception, and that is I do also work with VCs and the private equity group on the investor side, helping them understand customer success and occasionally getting involved in things like due diligence. ClickTools, we grew. We had opened an office, I think in 2009, if I remember rightly, in Phoenix, Arizona. And I used, like we were talking about earlier, Mark, I used to be over there every few weeks. But my interest in what we're going to talk about goes back probably in two stages. If I go back to my life to one of my previous worlds, I got interested in the whole area of customer focus. Back in 1989, as I said, I am that old. When the company I was working for, we were a conference and executive workshops company. And we did some research with partner in the States. I worked for the European arm of the American Management Association, based here, well, actually it was based in Belgium, in Brussels. And we'd done a joint venture partnership with the Japan Management Association. We did a piece of research in 1989, and it was called Global Attitudes to Service Excellence, which really was about, at that time, how people were thinking about customer focus. And that's really what piqued my interest. So my interest goes back to there. And it's been a red thread in everything I've done since then. So even before the Salesforce said you need a CSM, you know, the whole thing around doing the right thing for the customer was part of our DNA. I used to work for one of the hardware companies and on the business consulting side, and they ran a leadership development program, which I was a participant in. And part of that was one of these assessments, and it was a thing called the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, HBDI. And it's probably one of the most influential things I've ever done. And the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, as it says, is based on how the brain works. And the guy that developed it, Ned Herman, was working in management development in GE at the time they were developing brain scanners. And he got fascinated by how people think differently and what effect that has on how they interact with people and you know, what sort of work they're good at. So he developed this assessment, HBDI. And as I say, it's massively influential. Now, basically what this thing does is says, you have thinking preferences. Now, preference is different from competence. So I might be good at something, but that doesn't mean I prefer to do that. So I might be good at spreadsheets, but I'm not. It's not what turns my boat on, floats my boat at all. And so basically this assessment said, you know, it said, is your preference around thinking logically, practically, viscerally in terms of relationships, or are you more of an idealistic, holistic person? And when I got the results back and we got involved in this in quite a deep way, I'd never seen anything which was as descriptive of me. Like what sort of watches I wear, how I perceive news, how I relate to people. And it was very, very influential. And what happened was, and by the way, if you want to know more, I can recommend this book. It's called The Creative Brain by Ned Herman. We'll stick the details up afterwards. It's very old, but I think it's still being published. And it talks about this approach. And in there, Ned Herman talks about the structure of the brain. And he basically says, if you, and you know, working at G at the time with brain scanners. Now, this is a simplification. It's a gross simplification, but it's basically true. Our brains are made up of three parts. It's what's called the reptilian brain. There's a piece that's called the palo-mammalian brain, and there's a piece called the neocortex. Now, the reptilian brain controls a lot of our basic functions. our mammalian brain, which people may know better as the limbic system. It's full of all sorts of things like the amygdala and the hypothalamus and stuff like that, fancy names. So the reptilian brain says this is all about survival and function and basic stuff, a little bit of fight and flight. The limbic system is basically our center for our beliefs and our values. It's our emotional brain, it's also called. And the final part, the neocortex, is the grey matter, the thinking part. It's the bit which, according to studies, we've got more of than any other animal. And it's probably what's given us the edge in evolution. Now, the interesting thing about this brain structure is that's how the brain developed in an evolutionary sense. So dinosaurs, and in common with all reptiles, have effectively a reptilian brain. All they were bothered about was getting enough food, avoiding the predators. And other systems developed later. The other thing that's quite interesting is it also mimics or matches the way that the brain develops in a fetus. So the first part of the brain to develop is this reptilian brain. So what happens is very early on, a thing called a neuroplate turns on itself and it actually creates what's the brainstem and the spinal cord. And then the limbic system develops, and then the neocortex develops, and it continues to develop as we go through adult life. The other interesting thing is, and again, let me say, it is a gross simplification, but basically our thinking process matches that development. It matches almost a hierarchy. So when a new signal comes in, the first thing the brain does is says, what does this, don't need to worry about this. Do I need to get the hell out of here? Do I need to quicken my heart rate? Do I need to pump some adrenaline? Basic bodily functions. The second part of the brain that gets hold of that information is the limbic system. And that's the seat of our emotions and our values and beliefs. And that effectively filters the information it passes on to the cortex. So now you've got into a situation where, if you think about that, and by the way, the reptilian piece and the limbic system, it's all subconscious. We're not aware of it. It's not part of our conscious thought, which tends to happen in the neocortex. Now, the second thing that was really influential, and I'll show you how it relates to this, was I was involved in a team delivering some leadership development programs to a big retailer here in the UK, Marks and Spencer. Again, it was about mid-90s, I think, early mid-90s. And one of the speakers there was a guy called Professor Gordon Brown, who was a professor of psychology at Warwick University here in the UK. And at the time, his specialism was around the psychology of economics, things like the psychology of buying decisions. And Gordon shared some research and put us through some very simple exercise, which basically said, so take, for example, you're going to choose a car. And you think, well, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. And you think, okay, I'll make a logical decision about this. And I'll look at all the information that's coming in. Well, what Gordon's research showed, and it's not the only person that's done this, I'm sure, is that our limbic system filters the information and weights the information that's coming in. So let's say, for example, my unconscious preference was BMW. They'd done such a good job on brand positioning that actually any information that came in that said BMW is a great brand, it's a great car, I'd say, oh, that's important information. Any information that came in about a competing brand, I would consider less important. And if information came in about BMW that said, actually, it's a pile of crap, don't buy it, I'd probably dismiss that. So we get to this stage now where, and I think it's widely recognized, that actually we are making decisions emotionally before we're making them rationally. And remember, this is happening subconsciously. We don't know it's happening unless we are really aware, and then we can actually start to post-rationalize that. Now, this thing about information is a thing called selection bias. And selection bias is something called a cognitive bias. Now, if you go and look at cognitive bias in Wikipedia, it lists 174 different cognitive biases. So these are things that are affecting our and they're deviations from our norm of decision making. But again, most of them are happening subconsciously. So what effectively we're doing, what our brains are doing now, is creating our own version of reality, which quite often can be different from other people's reality. Now, let's turn this back to customer success specifically. What's customer success all about? And I'm going to end this by saying customer success is not about customers. Bear with me. Customer success, as we understand it, is about helping our customers achieve value from the products and services that we're providing to them. So let's start with value. If they're going to achieve that value, they've got to achieve some sort of change. And if they're going to see that some sort of change, they have to be motivated to do that. So let's start to unpick some of these cognitive biases as they affect, and the way that our brain works is it affects how we are making decisions about and how we're being influenced about what we should do. The first thing is that quite often when we're customer success, we talk about, how we're going to get a particular outcome. And we tend to think of outcomes as being, this is what the customer requires. And we think of customers as a singular thing. Well, actually, there's no such thing. There's a great saying that many of you will probably know, that company pays the bill, but people buy. And I think part of the problem we've got is that we think of value as a singular thing rather than as a thing which is for Mark and for Dave and for Dave. And by the way, we're all people. We all have got different needs, but not only have we got different needs, we're creating our own realities all the time because of the way that our brain works. So value is very much in the eye of the beholder. Unless we understand what that beholder is both wanting to achieve and how we can motivate them, we're never going to achieve value. So the first point is that, let's stop thinking about value as being something for the customer and start thinking about value for the individuals in that customer. And I have to give a shout out to a lady called Marika Georgiova, who's a CSM here in the UK. She has a background in her degree was in psychology, and she's helped me, research and sort some of this stuff up. So big shout out for Marika in doing that. So even if we've got, so let's stop thinking about value as a singular thing and start thinking about as individual things. The second thing is, okay, well, in terms of value, what level of value are we trying to help people achieve? So we start to think about goals. Now, goals relates to what the customer is trying to achieve, which is different. So in goals, what Mark will want to achieve is going to be different from what Dave wants to achieve in client success. But we can start to actually influence. So there's a couple of these cognitive biases that I want to talk about. One is a thing called anchoring. You've probably come across anchoring. In fact, if you've ever bought a SaaS package, the chances are you will have seen anchoring, because you'll go to their pricing page and it'll have 3 or 4 columns, and at the top of it will say best value or most preferred. That's anchoring. What anchoring is basically saying, if I give you a value early on in our conversation, you'll start to relate to that value. So if I say you need to achieve this, you'll start to think about what you actually want to achieve relative to that.
So is anchoring always a price, or what are some other ways that you can think about anchoring?
So I think we need to start thinking about anchoring, Mark, from a value perspective. So rather than me saying to you, Mark, here's the value you need to achieve, why don't I do a little bit of discovery that says, okay, if I look at all my customers, and our customers, some are really, really understanding and knowledgeable about the domain we're working in. Some of them are at ground zero. They're starting. So if I say, well, actually the median is this, given your sophistication, you should be about here. Here's a value. Oh, but by the way, why don't you set your own? So I'm suggesting here, here's an anchor, but you choose your value. Because by giving you choice, I'm playing to some other benefits. People don't like being dictated to. So by using a couple of these cognitive biases, anchoring and a thing called the default effect, I can start to say, yeah, here's where you should be aiming at. But equally, there's another piece comes into play, which is about intrinsic motivation. And I'll talk about this a little bit later on in a different context. But part of intrinsic motivation is actually the power of setting my own goals. If I feel that I'm in control, I am more likely to put the effort into achieving that. If I'm being told something, it's not really mine. So if we want to motivate people to set a good goal and start to move towards it, let's start to use some intrinsic motivation. A friend of mine used to talk about, and let's start talking about change. And he used to say there's 3 models of change, and you use them in different ways. Change to. So if we're in a crisis like today, we need somebody says, do this, do this, do this, do this. So in the UK, we started out with stay at home. No argument, stay at home. That's change to. Now we're starting to move into a new phase. Now our slogan in the UK starts stay alert. So it doesn't mean, I'm telling you exactly what you have to do, but I'm saying to you, here's some broad guidelines, but within those, figure it out. But there's another form of change, which is called change by, where I decide what I'm going to do. And guess what? If I make my own decisions, I'm more likely to follow them. So how we help people set goals, but then how we help them start to motivate themselves around change. And if you look at change, there's a number of really interesting cognitive biases. And I'm working on a piece at the moment, which is listing out some of these, not all of the 174 that Wikipedia lists, but some of them, and saying this is how they're going to affect customer success. So one of them, for example, is a thing called present bias. And that is our tendency to give a stronger weight to a payoff, to a benefit, which is closer to the present time. So if I set this goal, which is actually, it's going to take you 6 months to get there, woohoo, I'm already thinking that's way off. I need to do something tomorrow. I need to show some results next week, next month. So if we can start to think about how can we set maybe not big goals, but small goals that I can get to. So I'm starting to think and change the way that I think about what value is. And I'm working on this concept of something I'm calling a value threshold. And there's another benefit to that. There's a cognitive bias called the Peltzman effect. And that's a tendency to take greater risks when the perceived safety increases. So if I can make something which has got a degree of risk, and everything, all the change that we take has got a degree of risk. And if I can make that look less risky, then I'm more likely to motivate you to change. So then we start to look at how social proof becomes important. Oh, by the way, one of the most fundamental biases is a thing called status quo bias. Our preference is not to change. If we can keep things as they are and it still works, that's really, because then we've got no work today. I've got no mental effort. I've got no emotional pain. I've got no stress. It's just easy. And then the other thing about breaking it down is a cognitive bias called the subadditivity effect. Now this sounds, and all these things, many of them have got wonderful names, but they're actually relatively simple concepts. And this cognitive bias is about a tendency to judge the probability of the whole to be less than the probability of the individual parts. So again, if I've got this big goal out here, I think, oh, the probability of that happening, quite low. But if I've got a small change, probability of that happening, quite big. So why don't we start to think about, rather than saying to people, here's this big outcome, which by the way, if you're a user, has probably got no bearing on your job whatsoever, because that might be great for the CEO who's looking at ROI and this big outcome thing. Do I really need to worry about that? No, it's just completely distant from me. So why don't I do something which is much more focused about you and say, I'm going to take you from here to here. And then somebody else over here, I'm going to take you from here to here. And you start to create these little pockets of change, these pockets of improvement. A friend of mine when I was working at Unisys quite a few years ago, Tony Locke, he had this wonderful saying, and he said to me, if ever there was a problem, Dave, don't worry, it will all come together like a well-oiled slick. And it took me ages to figure out what he meant there, but actually, if you think about it, if I can put a little of oil on the water here and a bit here and a bit here and a bit here, some natural movement in the water, over time, these things will start to come together. Unless you've got a totally dysfunctional organization where everything's pulling completely separate parts, that's what will happen. So we can play in that and, you know, use these cognitive biases to start to think about, oh, let's not go for this big change, which everybody's going to be scared of, can't see the value of, doesn't relate to me, and just focus on the individual and make you better. And then I'll make you a bit more better. And then I'll make you better in another area. And the final piece I want to talk about in terms is motivation. Now, I suspect quite a lot of people have heard about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And in simple terms, extrinsic motivation is something that comes from outside. So we think about things like rewards, trophies, pay for performance. Now, extrinsic motivation can be very beneficial, but one of the things that lots and lots of research shows is that over time, its effect diminishes. And in fact, there's some research suggests that past a certain point, it becomes negative. And yet we're still wedded. And you go and look at the research on extrinsic, intrinsic motivation and pay for performance. All the research suggests that extrinsic motivation does not work long-term. Intrinsic motivation, things that I decide I want to do for me, is much more powerful. And there's a great TED Talk, if you're a TED Talk listener, by, I think it's called Simon Sinek, about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And he talks about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Well, if we think about that in the context of customer success, why don't we think about not just saying to customers, you need to complete this task, but think about it in terms of, I'm going to develop your skill. I'm going to develop your competence, your knowledge. I'm going to improve your mastery of this. Now that starts people to think, oh, I'm getting something really valuable out of this. So I'm not thinking just task, I'm thinking, again, it's back to an individual, I'm back to people. Autonomy, that example I gave of saying, you know, rather than saying, here's the goal that you should set, or just set a goal anywhere, I'll give you some choice. So then I've, you know, again, it's putting the onus back onto me. So if I say, for example, great performers, so the median is here, great performers are here. And by the way, a great performers looks like this. So you get into some sort of sophistication measure. Oh, in that case, I'll choose my goal, but I think I'm a bit better than average, but maybe not best. So I won't choose the goal that's associated with the, you know, the very best in class. I'll choose something which is maybe 20% above the median, but I've chosen. And it's much more powerful than is that.
How does this play in?
So,
like sometimes I'll use an app, like for instance, I'm still not sure what the algorithm is, but every time I log in, for instance, to LinkedIn, I see a little progress bar that says your profile is X% done. I'm still not sure how the heck to get that thing to 100%. I'm sitting there around, you know, 90 something percent, and sometimes it goes up or down. But like, is that kind of how this plays into it? Is it kind of giving people guideposts, or is that still not what you're talking about? Because, you know, in that example, they're kind of setting the rules of the game. Whereas, you know, it sounds like part of what you're saying is, you know, let the customer dictate, let the end user dictate what their end goals are. Like, help me understand if I'm thinking about that wrong.
I think what LinkedIn are trying to do is to get you to share more information.
Sure.
Because they use that to try to improve the service, and they're probably using the data off the back of that for other benefits as well.
Of course.
I think what I'm talking about, and by the way, you know, psychology, there are two forms of software that understand psychology really, really, really well. One is social media. They know how to keep you coming back.
Of course, yeah.
You know, fear of missing out. They play that card like crazy. I'm not talking about that because I think there's a danger in that. I think, you know, there's a piece of me, I keep saying I'm going to write a piece, which is that social media is the next smoking. Mm-hmm. I think we'll turn around in a few years' time and start to say, look at all the damage that did to people. And by the way, they knew they were doing it to us.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I'm talking about using psychology in a positive sense, not a negative sense. I'm sure people from LinkedIn and Facebook and others will say, no, that's not the case. But hey, I'm creating my own reality, so what the hell?
Why not?
No, I think what I'm talking about, Mark, is if you can't look at any of these mechanisms and these cognitive biases individually. You have to start to look at how they work as a package. So I can shape where I want you to go by things like anchoring and the default effect. I can shape how likely you are to act by bringing things closer to time, using the cognitive bias that I mentioned there. So I can start to think about, and I just start to change the way that I'm presenting information to people. And by the way, that's another cognitive bias. How information is perceived in shape depends on how it's presented. So I'm starting to get a little bit deeper into how this thing works and starting to use that to the customer's advantage.
So how would you advise somebody? So like there's a lot of customer success folks on the call, and a lot of them manage a customer success program. And like, let's take an example like an onboarding. Now, typically like most B2B SaaS companies have an onboarding program. And, you know, if it might be a 2-day onboarding, it might be a two-month onboarding, but they typically come into a new customer that signs up and they say, okay, great. Here's the onboarding plan. We're going to tailor it in a lot of cases to your individual needs. But a lot of times it's me giving you a plan. It might be like, you know, I've signed on a new ClientSuccess customer. We're taking them through an onboarding plan. From what I'm hearing from you, like that feels like that's only, you know, part of the puzzle. And like, how would you advise somebody in my shoes who has kind of an onboarding plan with kind of desired outcomes? What adjustments, what questions should I put in there? Should I actually be, you know, maybe presenting my plan, but also asking the customer for input, asking the customer for their goals, asking them for what incremental steps they want to take? Like, help me understand, help me think through that.
I think in a way, Mark, you've partly answered your own question. I think the discovery piece is the piece that we don't do well quite often. You know, we think we've got this customer, we think of this thing as being this singular thing, which is, you know, it's in some respects the company's faceless. Now go back to that statement again, you know, that companies may pay, but people buy. And the sooner we learn that we're dealing with people and individuals. Now, can I know everything about that customer? No. But if I've done my job well, not as an individual CSM, but as a CS capability, then I will have understood the different roles that I'm seeking to serve. So I'm working with a few, with a company at the moment. We're building out a success plan. That starts with an ideal customer profile. Now there's two elements to me of an ideal customer profile. One is, here's the companies I'm targeting. That's great for marketing and sales, and it's important.
Sure.
Second, by far the most important piece of it is what I call a role profile. The role profile is, for this use case, who are the people in the customer that need to be involved? And what do they worry about? What's their task? How are they measured? And I think we quite often in customer success, we just do not put the effort in to build this deep understanding of our chosen customers. So we almost set ourselves up to fail from the off. Now, have I got to mark the individual? No, but I've got to mark as a chief marketing guy. And at least I think I can start to understand a little bit closer to you and to your world. And the whole thing about jobs to be done is a key piece of this.
Sure.
So I'm starting to understand, and then start to say, Mark, for a company of your size, of your age, at your stage of growth, I could say, here's your goal. Or I could say, Mark, hey, Mark, where are you on this scale? Where are you on this scale? Where are you on this scale? Oh, you know, here's some data that we've got from, where do you think you want to, you know, what goal do you want to set yourself?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I do much more, I do much richer discovery, and I translate my telling into questions.
Got it. And I think the other thing that kind of jumps out to me is, I think what a lot of us do, let's say I sell a solution, or we have a solution that really solves a problem for, you know, maybe customer success, or for finance, or for operations, or for whoever. But oftentimes we don't think about like the people around it. So I sell a solution that maybe helps a chief marketing officer, but it requires, you know, 5 other groups to buy in. It might require operations and finance and sales and whoever to buy in. But if my value prop is specifically geared at just helping that one constituency drive their goals, I'm going to have a lot of problems if I don't also figure out a way to help these other constituencies also achieve their goals.
Right. And here's a mistake that we tend to make. And by the way, I've made all these mistakes myself. We tend to think of, oh, I need to make sure that the decision maker, I've got them on board.
Yep.
Because they're the people that, they signed the check.
She's signing the check. She's the only one I care about, whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what happens is I focus all my effort and, my success plan's built about the decision maker. And I ignore the lowly users.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so they don't use it properly. They don't get what they want out of it. They don't like using it, whatever it might be. Guess what? Decision maker's not going to get the results they want.
Yep. So maybe you were able to sign the deal, get the customer, but you never get the true value of the partnership in the long run. So frankly, you would just end up with retention and churn issues when that contract comes up for renewal.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, if I do you a disservice, I apologize, but we tend to use this word adoption a lot.
Okay.
Now, adoption matters because one of the cognitive biases is that we are quite, if you think about anchoring, one element of anchoring is our first impressions count. So starting a relationship off in the right way is absolutely important. So those early stages, adoption, matter. But actually what really matters, if we think about it, if we go back to what are we doing, it's value. It's how you, Mark, define value for you. And if I just focus on, oh, actually, Mark, you need to use this part of the product, use this part of the product. Am I really focusing on delivering value to you? Or am I just getting you to a point where one of my vanity metrics is met?
So do you have any examples of companies that have done that well? Because the adoption, they're using this part of my product well, it's really easy to measure, right? That's part of the reason why people will default to that, right? It's like, okay,
absolutely.
If they're using these three pieces of the platform, then there tends to be a correlation between them using these parts of the platform and them being a sticky customer. But there are examples where somebody's using those pieces of the platform and something outside of that happens, key sponsor leaves, something else happens. So can you think of any good examples or case studies of companies that have maybe brought together, because I don't think what we're saying is don't focus on adoption, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. So it's examples of companies that have done that, but also figured out a way to say, also, we're going to bring in, let's call it the customer's goals, the things that they really are trying to achieve.
Let me just correct something. I'm not saying don't focus on adoption. I am saying don't focus only on adoption.
Okay, very good.
That's a bit like saying I've run the race when the race is a 1,500 meters and I've completed the first lap. Mm-hmm. I've not won. I might be in the lead at that stage.
You've got to do it to get there, but it's not the end of the race.
Correct. I think it's a company that I'm starting to look more and more at, and it's a company called Superhuman.
Okay.
Based in San Francisco.
Sure.
They're an email company. They provide email. Run by a Brit who's based in San Francisco. Now, interesting thing about Superhuman, you can't sign up to buy it. You can sign up to put yourself on a waiting list, and then you wait to be invited.
Interesting.
So I've already created this cadre of, this must be special.
Some scarcity effect there.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, by the way, is another cognitive bias that starts to impact the value of something.
Everyone knows the example of early days of Facebook, where it's you had to sign up and wait for your college to get, to get on the platform. But if you weren't there, you were same effect.
You felt left out. Absolutely. Yeah. You felt stressed. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of how they build their software is based on game design and game theory. And there's another guy I know, he's runs a small company, actually bought out by a bigger company on the south coast of England, Mike Hawkyard. And if you go and look at his LinkedIn profile, I think it says something about it's making work fun. And that's another thing, if we can find ways to make this not work, but make it enjoyable. And again, enjoyable is something which is intrinsic. So I think this whole thing about, how we think about what we deliver really, really matters. So I think superhuman. Now, the interesting thing is, once your invite is accepted and you signed up, they have I think it's something like a half hour to 1 hour call with effectively an adoption specialist. Most of that is about understanding what you're trying to get out of email and how you use it. And it's about making you better user at email so that you can achieve the goals that you want to achieve.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, it's how to get rid of all the crap. It's not, how do I navigate around? It's what I'm focused on.
Sure. And I think that, to me, kind of what you're saying there really gets to the core of, we hear about this topic of solution selling or solution delivery. And that to me, that's really like comes down to the heart of it. It's not, I have a product to sell, I have a platform to sell. It's, no, I need to go in and I need to do some discovery and I need to understand what are you trying to accomplish? And, if it just so happens that the product that I have solves the problem or helps achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve, great. Like that's a good solution sale. But and I think what a lot of people, and why a lot of, especially like sales folks, will get a bad rap is, they have this culture and this mindset of, I'm just going to go in and try to sell my thing at all costs to whoever, even though it doesn't quite, accomplish the thing that you're trying to accomplish.
And a couple of thoughts then. I'm not a great fan of the term solution selling.
Okay.
Because the only people that get a solution are the people that actually implement it. We don't sell a solution, we sell a product, which might enable. And I think the better thing is, and it's quite interesting, sales and marketing are going this way now. There's a lot more people now talking about outcomes-based selling.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's probably a more valuable path. And the power of that is, so I mentioned, I'm writing the book, and the theme of the book is, in fact, the working title is Customer Success is the New B2B SaaS. And to me, I think part of the problem we've got is that most companies just don't understand customer success deep enough.
Sure.
And by the way, this is a problem that, sits effectively with the CEO. So the book says, if you think about, why did you start a company in the first place? Well, because I think I figured out a better way to solve a problem for a customer. Outcome. What's the best form of marketing? I get people interested in the outcome and how I can help them deliver it.
Sure.
Outcome. Customer success. What's the best salespeople do? They say, you've got this problem. Here's how we can help you solve it. And this is the results you'll get as a result of it. Outcome. And by the way, once you've delivered it, once you've sold it, you've got this capability over here. Outcome.
Sure.
Oh, and by the way, the product delivers this out of the box. Now, for outcome, read customer success. Customer success to me is the red thread that runs right through the company. It's not something, Tianzhou in his book Subscribed, great book, worth reading. And there's a line in there, it said, we tend to meet each new challenge by creating a new department. That's
or
the
a new
biggest
committee,
problem
or a new task force, or a new group of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, so if we've got this concept of customer success running right through, and we recognize that, we're not talking to, go back to what I talked about, ideal customer profile. Yeah, I've got these companies I'm targeting, but actually within these companies, I'm talking to this person, to this person, to this person. And the message I'm putting across to this one is this, and this one is this, and this one is this. So I was talking to Marika in doing some of the research, and we were having just a chat about it. And it was a throwaway line. I said, actually, we're talking about the wrong things. We shouldn't be talking about customer success. We're talking about people success.
Mm-hmm.
And the more and more I've thought about it, the more and more I've thought, actually, that's right. We should rename it people success.
Right.
Because that's who we need to be focused on. We need to be focused on people.
Yeah, you see this big movement, people talking about, I'm a B2B to C company, because at the end of the day, yes, I might sell my solution. The buying entity might actually be a business, but the people actually making the decision, they're the actual consumers, they're the people within that business that are actually making the purchase. So I actually need to, convince and drive success for the individual people, help them achieve their goals. And if those are their career goals or their personal goals or what have you, if I can help them to achieve that, then, the B2B sale just kind of comes along with that.
Yeah, that's a piece that I know I need to tackle at some point in time. That's this unwritten goals. We're very good in business at putting on a business face.
Sure.
Or it's all about achieving these results and that. Actually, it's no, I want to be better than him or her over there. I want to get that next promotion. I want to be the best that there is in this thing. And that drives a lot of what we do. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking, there's a great, lovely, forgive me for this one. One of my favorite sayings is, I think sex is better than logic, but I can't prove it. It's like we wrap ourselves up in this logic and rationale, which is completely alien to the way that these things work. We need to start to think a bit more about, what is the emotional element? And emotional doesn't mean, raw emotion in that sense, but it does mean about, what are some of the underlying things and beliefs and values that are driving the way that we think and what we're trying to achieve? Yeah,
makes sense. Cool. So I guess, are there any, we're kind of getting toward the end of it, we got a few comments here. Gene says you're spot on. People, emotion, results. That's what drives success. Travis puts in an interesting comment here for those who want to kind of study up more on this topic. He says psychology of economics, also known as behavioral economics, has been a contemporary focus for economic research. Richard Thaler, back in 2017, won the Nobel Prize on this. So there's a ton of, research on, because I mean, the traditional economic model says people are rational thinkers, rational buyers. They make rational decisions based on having perfect information. And it turns out that a lot of this research proves that that's just not the case. You hear the term of people will maybe buy with logic, but justify with emotion, or maybe it's the opposite. I forget which version of it, but there's a lot of kind of understanding the psychology of the people you work with. I won't even say the psychology of your customers, but the people that you work with, because that's really who you're working with, whether you're selling to them, whether you're trying to drive success with them, whatever have you. So, I
mean, it's very much the case, Mark, that we buy with emotion and justify with logic. Because what we are, if you go back to the triune brain, the fact that, is it a fight or flight issue, a survival issue? Is it, what do our values and beliefs? Therefore, here's what I want to think about. And if we recognize that, we're going through this filter all the time, now, by being aware of that, I can go back and I can question my rationality. And, Michael's right. Predictably irrational is spot on.
Yep.
Yeah. There's so much good stuff out there, but we just I don't think we tap into it enough. I think if I've got one criticism of the discipline that I love and I'm passionate about, is that we just don't think enough about it. We tend to think we can approach it simplistically. And again, that's not new. There's a French philosopher de Tocqueville said, people are more likely to believe a simple lie than a complex truth.
Gotcha.
And we do need to just think a little bit more about what we're doing.
Sure. No, I agree with you. So, well, cool. We're coming to the end of the hour. We've got, there's a few other comments, how can, let's see. Oh, let me read this question from Travis, and then maybe David, you can kind of share just kind of a couple final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up. But Travis asked this question of how can internal communication start focusing on intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic? So for instance, I think if we're as a company, the way I kind of think of that is, if my company is constantly talking about the extrinsic motivation or the adoption or the end result, the numbers, et cetera, how do you think you can kind of shift the discussion internally with your company to start focusing more on intrinsic discussions? Any thoughts there?
I go back to something I mentioned earlier. I go back and look at, I think it was Simon Sinek's work on, Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink talked about mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
Got it, yeah.
And if you think about it, we feel better about ourselves if we get good at doing a job.
Mm-hmm.
So helping people develop the skill sets that they need, giving them the confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Autonomy, give them some choice over what they do and how they do it. So many of our organizations are hidebound and constrained by micromanagement. This belief that, I'm up here, I know best. Well, two things. One is, I've been there and I don't. And the second is, even if I do, I'm not creating the right environment for people to bring forward their ideas and to really get engaged.
Sure. Yeah.
There was an American, a guy called Bill Gore, founded a company that was around Gore-Tex.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I remember listening to him talk many years ago, and he talked about empowerment. And he said, my job as a chief exec is to help people make decisions. So I need to draw, and he said, think of my organization as a ship, and there's a water line, the Plimsoll line, it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, basically, part of the ship sits below the water and part of the ship sits above it. And if you're going to make a decision about changing something or drilling a hole or adding a piece above the water line, well, it might slow us down a little bit and it might make us a bit ugly, and we could probably put it right. It ain't going to sink the ship. He said, what I need to do is make sure that people understand that if they're going to do something below the water line, I don't want to stop them, but I want them to make sure that everybody else is on board.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the telling thing was, he said, in his view, and he was talking about American CEOs, his job was to draw where this water line was. And he said, in my view, most American CEOs draw this water line about a foot below the top of the funnel. So they just don't give people space. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens? It sinks. If you look at the boat that travels quickest, that can change direction most, it's a speedboat. Mm-hmm. A speedboat spends, 9/10 of it is out of the water. Mm-hmm. Look at the boat that won the beat Ellison in the what's it called?
The America's Cup.
America's Cup, yeah.
Yep.
Look how much of the boat's in the water.
Sure.
But we don't. We just say no. I'm the boss. I'm going to tell you, and we've just got to break that completely. And that's where autonomy comes in. And of course, then what you've got to do is you've got to do the third piece, which is purpose. You've got to give people a sense of what it is that you're trying to achieve. What does the big picture look like? And give them a space. And I think the same is exactly true of customers. Build their skill sets, make them masters in what what that domain is around. Give them choice. Let them set their goals and let them set how they're going to achieve some of that within some broad guidelines.
Sure.
And then, I'm not quite sure about purpose yet, but I'm working on that one.
Cool. Very good. Now this has been really thought-provoking. I've got a ton of notes here of things I'm going to study more on, starting with the HBDI test, the creative brain book, getting better understanding of cognitive biases. I think there's we could obviously spend, several hours on this, but I've learned some really interesting things. David, really appreciate you spending the